Look, guys, so I released my Urban Spook video yesterday talking about what I didn't really like about his channel and his analog horror series called The Painter, and I ended up getting quite a few comments on it, just telling me that I was regurgitating what other content creators were saying, and I felt like that was actually a fair criticism. I went around and watched a couple other reviews after finishing my video, and it really does sound like a lot of people have drawn the same conclusions, but I don't think that that's necessarily an issue with the content creators or necessarily an issue with me personally, but maybe if all of us are drawing a similar conclusion, it means that maybe Urban Spook needs to take that criticism to heart and figure out a way to improve it. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's his series, and like I said in the previous video, he'll just do whatever he wants to do with it, which is kind of why a lot of the episodes exist, like, Pigs, for example. He just doubled down on the absolutely grotesque horror that he was going for that everyone already hated, and he was like, nope, we're gonna do it even more extreme now, and it didn't really work for him very well. But that being said, I figured today I'd take a look at a horror series, or, well, an analog horror series that I personally enjoy. If you guys haven't heard of Greylock, Greylock is another analog horror series that had a super positive reception from the community, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of a breakdown and just telling you guys what I do enjoy about it. Greylock is a series created by Rob Gavagan. If you guys don't know who Rob Gavagan is, he tends to go over kind of like strange and paranormal things. He covers murder plots, things like that. I absolutely love that type of content as I'm a criminal justice major in school, so it's very entertaining to read about stuff like that in a less than professional way. It really helps to give you a glimpse into a lot of the heads of these, deranged people. That being said, Greylock is actually an analog horror series that takes place near Mount Greylock in Massachusetts, and it kind of revolves around the government conspiracies that surround the area. And I'm not going to give you a more detailed explanation until we've seen a couple of the tapes. But that's pretty much the overarching idea behind the series, and I thought it was really, really well done. I am going to be doing a sort of like side by side comparison of things that I think Urban Spook misses out on that this series actually excels in. So if you guys do enjoy this video, please feel free to go down below, drop a like on the video, subscribe if you want to see something like this again, and if you don't want to see a video like this ever again, let me know down in the comments. I really do appreciate the criticism, and I'm very new to making videos, so it really does go a long way in how I change the process of editing and pretty much everything else to do with the creation of these videos. But with that being said, we are going to get right into the first tape of Greylock.
Primary systems online. Meeting sequence complete. Emergency shutdown protocols disengaged. System was offline for time code error 106. Contact technician for assistance. Welcome to CONDONE USA Enhanced Access Operations. Please enter your clearance credentials. Error. These credentials are not recognized. Clearance credential requirement overridden. Administrator privileges granted. Welcome back, unknown user ID. What would you like to do? Accessing archival storage form, GBS. Data extraction initiated. Data extraction, 10% complete. Data extraction, 4 complete. Data extraction, 80% complete. Data extraction, complete. All data extracted to error no.
Did you guys notice how I didn't say a single word during that intro tape? That's because I didn't have to. The first tape of Greylock actually sets up the narrative and it sets up the overall setting very, very effectively. It shows that obviously somebody's trying to gain access to something with the government, As it says in the background, credentials not allowed, and something about credentials, unfortunately, just not allowing you to gain access to the facility. Now, this is a big contrast from kind of how Urban Spook begins. When you're seeing Greylock, you're allowed to kind of just take in what's going on, and you don't need any description or overall expression to help you figure out what's going on. And it does this very effectively. Like I said, you don't need them to tell you that, this has something to do with the government. When you hear credentials and you hear an AI voice in the background, it's pretty easy to figure out that something's going on here related to either the government or a scientific team. Someone with access to technology. And it helps to set the scene when you're looking around in the background, and it shows different rooms in disarray and computers that are destroyed, turned off, and if you notice, there's not a single person in sight. This shows and kind of gets the idea across that maybe something happened here, something the government experiment that didn't go the way they had hoped, and it helps you kind of get engaged with the story right off the bat. You find yourself wondering, well, what happened here? And it does reel you in.
When men pursue evil, it is evil that they will find. Mark my words, there is no good that can come from the pursuit of darkness.
The second tape begins on a seemingly abandoned mountain road. We watch as the driver calmly drives down the road as he's listening to what we can assume is a religious radio channel. The radio channel says, and I quote, "When men pursue evil, it is evil they will find." This can almost be taken as foreshadowing in that this man is currently pursuing Greylock or attempting to learn the secrets of the mountain. What I find to be incredibly effective about the scenery of this tape is that as he's driving down the road, all the streetlights and even speed limit signs that are illuminated off in the distance appear to be a living, breathing entity. However, as we come closer to them, it's seen that they're simply signs or simply lights. However, when it's off in the distance, it appears like it's something we should be looking at, and it creates a sense of unease prior to him getting to his destination. The man then comes to a stop outside of a seemingly abandoned wooded area. He enters the wooded area. We can tell by the sound of what seems to be very strong wind that it's incredibly cold out here and definitely not the type of weather that anyone would just go adventuring in for no specific reason. This leads us to assume that he's on a predetermined mission and he is specifically looking for something. The camera pans around a seemingly abandoned area in the woods until it pans to what could only be described as a scene of extreme gore. The camera zooms in on what we can assume is a fleshy appendage or perhaps a dead animal sitting on the ground. The camera then pans back to the overall wooded area around him, and we could only assume this is to get the idea across that perhaps he's being watched, or perhaps he hasn't found what he's looking for, but he's found something to support his overall adventure. The camera then cuts back to him walking along a trail, following what we could only assume are bloody footprints. While doing this, the audio on his camera becomes seemingly distorted, almost as if the warning that the man over the radio was giving to him has been ignored and therefore has led to some type of corruption in his electronics. As he continues his journey around the woods, he simply finds more and more evidence that something has happened here, something that resulted in bloodshed, and something that he should probably want to run away from. As the camera once again pans around the darkened woods, it's almost as if he's looking for someone, as if he assumes that there's someone still here. Whatever created this bloodshed, whatever created the gore that he just came upon, perhaps they're still here, watching him. The camera then becomes distorted again, but this time not just in sound but in visuals too, as if a red hue has come over the camera lens. The camera then picks back up in his car. As the car slowly lurches among the abandoned road, the driver, even for just a moment, turns on his high beams. One could only assume why he did this, but my assumption is that he thought he saw something in the woods and he hoped to confirm it. He turned on his high beams multiple times. However, when he does this, you see there's nothing there. Perhaps this is simply playing with our head, and there was something there that could only be seen through the camera, and we were unable to see it. Or perhaps it's the other way around. However, whatever he does see in the woods leads him to speed out of
that
there.
he bestows upon you.
We hear what can only be described as someone or something banging on the vehicle just out of frame of the camera. We then pick up with the driver as he speeds furiously down the road in an attempt to get away from whatever just touched his vehicle, meaning perhaps he found more than he bargained for. The radio becomes distorted yet again. However, this time the radio has the idea that the devil is still with him. It's repeated multiple times and perhaps is more than just a random radio message.
Greetings, and welcome to the Preconditional Protocols and Orientation video system provided by Unit 13 as part of the United States Army and Project Stargate, created in partnership with Semiodyne USA. On behalf of all of us here at Unit 13, congratulations on your selection as one of our testing candidates. You likely have a lot of questions.
Tape number 3 begins with our first confirmation that this is government related. The tape actually talks about our indoctrination into what's known as Project Stargate. Project Stargate was actually a real-life project funded by the United States government. The Stargate Project was a secret U.S. Army unit established in 1977 at Fort Meade, Maryland, by the Defense Intelligence Agency and SRI International. The idea of the program was to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. The project and its precursors and sister projects originally went by various codenames. Some such codenames include Gondola Wish, Stargate, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Project CF, Sunstreak, Scanate, until 1991 when they were consolidated and rechristened as the Stargate Project. What makes this premise so terrifyingly effective is that the CIA never actually published their findings. They never reported if they found something that worked or if they found something that, didn't work. All we know is that they kept finding funding for the program, and it continued to be a program for many, many years. One could only assume that there's funding there because, at some extent, it was effective and it was working. However, that's just a theory, a conspiracy theory, but nevertheless a theory.
And this video is designed to answer them all. First, let's go over some background information to provide you with the crucial context you'll need for a full understanding of what it is we're doing at Unit 13. We are sure you've heard plenty of rumors surrounding what it is that we do, but we are willing to bet that most everything you've heard is wrong. Being a highly confidential part of Project Stargate, which you've already been briefed on, Unit 13 studies a revolutionary and promising area of parapsychology, thought forms. If you're unfamiliar with what thought forms are, that's okay. You're in the majority. So, what are thought forms?
This is yet another absolutely terrifying parallel to real life because in the Buddhist religion, as well as other sorts of mysticisms and the paranormal, a tulpa is a real thing. A tulpa is a materialized being or thought form, typically in human form, that's created through spiritual practice and intense concentration. Tulpas are essentially imaginary friends that you create by concentrating on them. It sounds like a pretty harmless topic until you realize that oftentimes what you create is not exactly what you wanted to create. They're often considered to be sentient and relatively independent, which also just kind of adds another layer to the horror. The term tulpa comes from Tibetan Buddhism, where it refers to a thought form created using the mind and energy to will consciousness into existence. In modern times, people who have tulpas are called tulpamancers. Tulpamancers generally consider tulpas to be a psychological concept rather than paranormal. They can take on many forms, including animals, cartoon characters, or anime like characters. Some people have one tulpa, while others have multiple.
Forms and ghosts are very similar in a number of ways. Individuals can make contact with them through communication devices, such as a Ouija board or through EVP sessions, while the thought form may respond through moving objects, manipulating electronics, or even speaking words and short phrases. Due to their striking similarities, a current theory established by Unit 13 suggests that what we know as ghosts may not be as common as we once believed. Rather than a deceased person's energy being left behind after death, it's possible, and indeed likely, that these paranormal entities are actually thought forms that are unintentionally created by those individuals that the deceased has left behind, who spend inordinate amounts of time in deeply emotional states, where their mental capacity is largely occupied by a powerful focus on the departed individual. In other words, as these are the ideal.
You can see here why tulpas might not always be a positive thing. The video says that oftentimes what we perceive as ghosts are merely tulpas of the loved ones of the deceased. And considering that when you're grieving the death of a family member, you're usually not in the best state, I feel like when you focus your consciousness into a tulpa and create one, it may not come out as the most friendly entity ever, which could lead to a plethora of problems. Like with most things the government touches, they simply want to speed it up and inadvertently end up corrupting the practice. This leads to tulpas that are created in a non-natural way. They enlist the help of Dr. Bernard Hayes in an effort to actually figure out how to expedite this process, as realistically it would take many, many years to create a tulpa through traditional means. However, this leads to even more issues.
That would benefit American society and help keep American citizens safe. Unfortunately, the practice of intentionally creating a thought form by traditional methods would undoubtedly take years and years of developmental training. So, Project Stargate has enlisted a world-renowned authority in thought forms, a man named Dr. Bernard Hayes, to oversee a number of the operations related to Unit 13's work. His participation has been invaluable and has brought fruitful results to the project. Due to Unit 13 and Semiodyne USA's combined efforts, bringing together some of the most prestigious minds in the world, specializing in the sciences of the human consciousness, with cutting-edge technology and engineering methods, we've created a groundbreaking, proprietary invention. Introducing the Thought Form Manifester. The Thought Form Manifester is able to create truly independent and self.
The government then creates something called the Thought Form Manifester, which is essentially a machine that can expedite the previously mentioned process. However, like with most things, if you don't take your time with it, it does lead to some unintended side effects, as we're going to see.
Of an emotion. That being said, it's recommended to brace yourself before touring the thought form chambers, as thought forms can also take on appearances that could be considered disturbing, like a creature one might see in a childhood nightmare. There's no reason to be afraid, however. All thought forms are docile by nature, and while they may look or behave in a frightening manner, and though they are capable of making physical contact, they pose no threat to humans. Once your session in the Thought Form Manifester is completed, your thought form will be securely transported directly into a containment chamber. Thought forms are unable to pass through the barrier of the and will not be capable of causing you any issues. There are some very rare potential side effects that may result from your session. These side effects include increased tiredness, loss of balance, dizziness, insomnia, vomiting, episodes of temporary amnesia, and mild hallucinations. These side effects, if present, will clear up within 72 hours of your session, and are simply signs of your brain recalibrating to the real world. It is recommended you refrain from driving or operating heavy machinery for 72 hours after your session, even if you experience no side effects. None of these side effects should cause you any harm or overt stress, and former testing candidates who have experienced these side effects reported that they were very mild and merely a transient inconvenience. With all of that out of the way, we are looking forward to your participation with Unit 13, and your time in the Thought Form Manifester has been scheduled. However, there are several required mind exercises as a part of this video system that must be completed prior to your scheduled date in order to prime your consciousness and ensure the highest quality results. Please enter the video cassette labeled TF2, Waking Your Subconscious, now. This is the end of this tape.
Now, there's a lot of conclusions you can draw from that tape. First off, I don't know if you guys noticed, but there was a little bit of distortion on the video clip, and that's intended. So, I think what we can take from that is that at the time they made these tapes, they were unfortunately not 100% truthful in what they were saying. I know, believe it or not, the government lies. That's crazy. But that being said, you also see that in the tapes, sometimes the thought forms come out as one of your worst fears, hence the spider thought form. This being said, I don't think it's anyone's intention to create their worst fears, but oftentimes your subconscious will hold on to thoughts of things like that. It's pretty easy to see how this project could go awry incredibly easily, and given that there's more videos and more tapes in Greylock, it's also pretty safe to say that this did not stay contained, and the government once again failed. Now that we finished tape 3, I kind of want to go and draw some comparisons to UrbanSpook's work. I don't know if you guys realized, but the last tape we watched was literally just like an orientation video. It was just them showing videos, showing clips, and explaining stuff. But it works so well. And the reason I think it works so well in Greylock and doesn't work very well in UrbanSpook series is that in Greylock, it's established that this is a government video. Whereas in UrbanSpook's work, it's like they kind of claim it's a police tape, but then they have things that just wouldn't be consistent with a police tape. Why would they add music in the background, you know? Why would they show a lot of these images with very unprofessional descriptions of what occurred there? Now, I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, well, I'm in college, so I know how these things would go, but I do have a little bit of a glimpse into how a police report would be filed, since I'm a criminal justice major, and I've studied it for the better part of 3 years. The clip we're watching now is actually episode 1 of UrbanSpook's analog horror series, also known as Faces. Now, the issues that I have specifically with Faces is that it begins with a warning sign. Right? It begins with the warning page, which kind of implies that it's either a government or police entity that's created these video clips. However, they don't include some things that should be on every police recording or really any documentation by law enforcement. It doesn't include the case number, the date and time, the location of the paintings. It doesn't involve the officer names or badge numbers. And there's not really any suspect or interviewee names or identifying details, but usually that would be involved in any recording with law enforcement or anything to do, you know, just as documentation, because that stuff's all important, right? And it doesn't include any of that. One other thing I notice is that there's a very basic term that I think every single one of us have heard, whether it's in movies or just a bad cop show or, you know, something we've seen, whether it's mystery, crime, whatever. And that's the word post-mortem. So post-mortem is essentially after death. So for example, if someone were stabbed and they were, you know, essentially their body was desecrated after death, you would write they were stabbed post-mortem. Whereas if they were stabbed while they were alive, you would say they were stabbed pre-mortem. And that's a really basic term that honestly holds a lot of weight because it shows that he did the bare minimum for research into, you know, making a police tape. But he doesn't use that term. He simply uses when they were alive or after death. And that's not a massive thing, but it's something that kind of, you know, ticked me off ever so slightly. Just because, again, it's kind of like the bare minimum. It's something we hear all the time, and I feel like he didn't really put any thought into creating that part of his story. And it's not even necessarily something that I'd bring up if it wasn't for this image right here that claims that autopsy showed that James was alive for several days without a face, which means a medical examiner conducted an autopsy, which kind of contributes to the idea that this is a police tape. However, it's missing very basic law enforcement terminology. Now, it's fair to just give him the benefit of the doubt here, but when you're going for kind of like a feeling of authenticity, it has to be, authentic. You have to have the bare minimum there so that people understand what they're looking at. And the way he did it, it just doesn't come off that way. But when you compare that to how Greylock did it, opening with the message by the United States Army, it's a little bit different. Because the Army tends to do things that aren't necessarily professional, but they also do have orientations similar to this. I won't take up a very long time talking about the comparison and contrast, but you can just go into Google and look up United States Army Department from the 70s, 80s, 90s orientation videos, and they do have a very similar format. It just shows that the creator of Greylock took that tiny little extra step to add that authenticity to his work, and I personally appreciate that so much. Tape 4 begins with an unknown man, presumably the gentleman we've been following for multiple other tapes, recording a seemingly inhabited home. He records the windows for just a moment and watches as some of the lights do go off, indicating that someone or something is located inside of the house. This is pretty much my favorite episode in the series, and I really do wish I could just let it play and allow you guys to enjoy it, but I think for copyright reasons, that's probably not okay. That being said, if you guys haven't gone and checked out Greylock already on your own, I recommend at least giving tape number 4 a quick go, and then coming back to the video. We then follow him as he moves up to the house, seemingly looking for tracks, or perhaps something on the ground. As he gets nearer to the window, he takes a moment to observe who or what is inside the house. While he's looking into the house, it's fairly obvious that nobody or nothing is visible through the window that he's peeking in. However, he decides that the best route or the best course of action for him is to actually enter the house. Now, I'm not quite sure why he does this, and the series does explain in a little bit, but I don't want to spoil that right now. The build-up through this tape is absolutely gripping, as pretty much the entire time that he's investigating the house, nothing seems out of the ordinary. It simply looks like a normal suburban home, and it doesn't appear to actually have anyone in it other than the fact that the lights are on, which would indicate there's probably somebody home. As the cameraman makes his way to the window, he actually places the camera on the ground just momentarily to remove the windowsill and gain access to the residence. The man behind the camera does eventually gain access to the house, and again, it's just a ton of suspense and buildup that's absolutely terrifying and so efficiently done here that I really don't know what else to do except let this next monstrosity of terror kind of speak for itself. Now, it's never explicitly confirmed whether the screaming we hear is because of this guy behind the camera, or if it's a thought form or something else that's actually come to attack a family. However, the tape then cuts to the cameraman walking back through a field. He pans up at the moon, and as you can see, he's completely alone in the woods, but for some reason he's still recording, as if he's looking for someone or something.
I'd like to thank my producer, my writers, my director, my friends, and you, the ordinary people.
The next scene cuts to a man in a Max Headroom costume that's apparently being aired on television. This is actually a callback to an event that happened in real life. On November 22nd, 1987, an unknown person wearing a Max Headroom mask and sunglasses hijacked the broadcast signals of two Chicago television stations, WGN-TV and WTTW. The incident is an example of broadcast signal intrusion, and the man behind it was never caught. The following clip is actually a part of the actual intrusion that occurred all the way in 1987. I do want to advise you guys that it is fairly disturbing, and it's really just an uncomfortable clip, so let that warning just sit in your mind for a moment.
That is stupid. You should talk often with the old ones of your tribe. That is the only way to learn.
I'll get you a hot drink, miss.
I've seen some dry clothing.
As you can see, this clip is very uncomfortable as you watch the man in the Max Headroom costume pretty much get spanked by someone in what I assume is a bunny costume. It's a pretty cool little callback in this analog horror series to a real-life event that a lot of people, including myself, find absolutely terrifying. But that being said, we are going to get back to Greylock.
49 residences since approximately 11:15 p.m. last night. The attacks appear to be random, spanning across the towns of North Adams, Cheshire, Savoy, and Windsor. Residents are urged to take the following actions immediately. Wake all occupants of your home. Lock all doors and windows. Close all curtains and blinds. Gather in a secure area of your home where multiple exits are available to prevent yourself from being cornered. Additionally, residents are urged to
We then find ourselves listening to an emergency broadcast system from the Massachusetts State Police. They're currently describing a massive string of violent break-ins. They say 49 in total as of the recording, and it's very clear to see that there's a very high chance that these are indeed the thought forms breaking out of whatever government containment area they were held in, causing havoc on the civilians. It simply tells people not to open the door to anyone that they recognize or don't recognize, and to arm themselves and wait for the police to assist them. It's very clear to see at this point that the government has failed to contain whatever experiment they were trying to keep under wraps near Mount Greylock. This is an absolutely terrifying part of this video, as for simple reasons. I mean, we've all seen emergency broadcast systems at some point in our life. However, I think most of us were relieved to figure out that it was just a test. However, this shows that the problem is far more widespread than the man behind the camera seems to know, or if he's a part of the problem, far more widespread than anyone knew up until this point. I am going to allow the next part of this video to play out in its entirety. However, I do just want to give a quick jump scare warning to anyone that it applies to. This absolutely traumatizing portion of the video has the man behind the camera peering out the window into the woods, where we hear what seems like screaming of some kind. Now, what that screaming is absolutely left up to your interpretation. Is it perhaps people being attacked, or could it be the thought forms attempting to mimic the screams of their victims? However, his little escapade into staring at the woods is interrupted by a man's hand seemingly grabbing the window, which then leads into a bunch of grotesque imagery showing what we could only assume to be victims of the thought forms, or the thought forms themselves. Tape 5 begins with an ultrasound being conducted by a nurse on a new mother, hoping to check on the health of her baby. The strange thing is, initially the nurse is able to locate her baby, however, on a second look, there's no baby to be found.
As soon as we're done.
He's excited to be a dad, huh?
Oh, yes, he certainly is. We both can't wait to be parents.
Aw, and you said you've been together since high school, right?
Yep.
That's so sweet. And have you decided on a name for your baby boy yet?
Yep, we're going with Max.
Ooh, Max, huh? That's a nice, strong name.
That's why my fiance wanted it so bad. He says it'll help make him strong right off the bat.
That's a pretty good way of thinking about it. So let's see how strong little Max is so you can hurry up and make that call.
Yes, please. He's been moving around like crazy the past couple weeks, so I think he's really strong. Strong enough to kick so hard I almost throw up sometimes, too.
Aw, what a wild boy. Activity is good.
Yep.
Okay, hopefully this isn't too cold.
No, it's okay.
There he is. He's definitely a growing boy, that's for sure. And you're both looking really good.
Oh, I love hearing that.
Let's get some measurements to see exactly how much he's grown.
What was that?
I don't know. I've never seen that before. Maybe something to do with the power.
Oh, okay.
This is a bit strange.
What? What's strange?
Nothing to worry about or anything. Just having some trouble finding the baby all of a sudden.
Maybe the machine messed up?
Possibly. But I can still see everything else. It's just not picking up the baby for some reason.
Has this ever happened before?
Well, sometimes babies can move into certain positions that are hard to see.
But, but, but you can't see my baby at all?
I'm looking. Don't worry, he's definitely here. You know what? Why don't we just see if we can borrow another machine, okay? There has to be something wrong with this one. I'll be right back.
Okay.
What are you talking about?
No.
This can't be happening. The baby doesn't know the water? That makes no sense. I know.
Is it happening? What happened?
Right now.
For anyone confused on what just happened in this clip and why the baby seemingly disappeared, the expecting mother in the video essentially faced a false pregnancy that then manifested itself in the form of a thought form. Essentially, the idea is that in her head she needed the baby or wanted that baby with every part of her consciousness that her body and her mind created. She unintentionally created a thought form inside of herself, and then it disappeared, seemingly after being spotted by the ultrasound. The baby disappeared once it was put under scrutiny of its existence, and she could no longer live with the grief, resulting in the next newspaper article, which I will transcribe for you guys using the comments on the Greylock video. I also just wanted to give a quick thank you to Khadiza Ahmed 8989, as I personally did not understand what was happening in this clip prior to reading his comment. At the end of the clip, we're actually greeted with a newspaper article, and before I do read the transcript for the article, I just want to say a massive thanks to @CattyCat, who is also in the comments of Tape 5. Without their help transcribing it, I don't think I'd ever understand what it says, as my eyes are absolutely terrible and I can barely read things on billboards. That being said, the newspaper reads as follows. Tiffany Marie Elaine Crisaldi, elementary school teacher, 29, of Rose Pine Drive, Adams, died unexpectedly Monday morning. She had suffered tremendously after the sudden loss of her unborn son, Maxwell Marsh. On March 31st, she was unable to live with the heartache any longer. Born in Windsor, Massachusetts on May 20th, 1958, she was the only child of Harrison and Kathleen Crisaldi. She attended school in Adams, Massachusetts, and graduated in 1976 from Grand Hill Regional High School among the top of her class. She went on to graduate from North Adams State College in an unknown year with a degree in early childhood education. During her freshman year of high school, she began dating Alexander Marsh, the man who would become her non-eligible is what it says in the comment, and I also could not make heads nor tails of this part, so we're going to skip to where I can read it again. Safe to assume they were dating, or even engaged, and he was the father of the disappeared baby. Pretty much everything else that I skipped over in the article I don't think anyone could make heads nor tails of, but again I wanted to give a massive thank you to @CattyCat in the comments section of episode 5 of Greylock for that transcription. Tape 6 begins with a lecture given by Dr. Bernard T. Hayes, the same doctor mentioned in Tape 3, or the orientation tape, behind the United States Army's Department of Thought Forms, or whatever you'd like to refer to it as. However, he was heading the project to create thought forms that could be used in applications for the government and the American citizens, and he's essentially talking about how through time and time again we've attempted to reach God or speak to God, and we've been unable to find a God or a single person that we can look at and speak to in all of our time and tribulations.
Welcome back, user. Frank Porter. Please enter your credentials. Credential requirement bypassed by system administrator. Greetings, unknown user ID. Welcome to CONDONE USA's virtual.
We then find ourselves viewing the answering machine of CONDONE USA, or the proxy company for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We're assigned to a sender named Paul Morelli. Paul Morelli is a part of a construction and mining corporation that's tasked with building a redacted facility. We can only assume that the facility was used for thought-form experiments. However, as we'll soon learn, it's never completed.
Paul Morelli. We ran into somewhat of an issue today. We came across these tunnels inside the mountain, pretty deep in, but well, this is going to sound a little crazy, but he told me to call if anything strange came up, and I figured this qualifies. People have been here before. Some obviously man-made shit in there, like carvings and stone. This shit looks ancient, like real old. I took a crew in to look through it, but seems part of the tunnels caved in some time ago. We're going to just have to bust through it regardless.
This shows when Paul Morelli and his construction crew first make it to Mount Greylock. At the time, they have nothing to be worried about because they have a giant government contract to cover for them and give them funding.
Today might be a bit slower than usual. Unfortunately, a number of the crew are sick as dogs. Not really sure what kind of stomach bugs going around or what, but we'll do our best to pick up the slack. I'm calling in some guys who have a day off, so hopefully things will get a little closer to normal, you know. That being said, I don't know how the hell this happened, but the section of the tunnel here caved in is clear. The tunnel's been wired up with a few lights, too. Wanted to see if maybe you sent someone in while we were off shift. Night crew said you didn't, but, you know, I didn't see anybody else either, so... But a few of the guys said they'd seen something running around in the woods surrounding the site. I figured it's probably a deer or whatever, but seeing all the ruckus we're making out here, you know? But they all insisted it was something else. Something like a real tall man. Might just be some environmentalist moron trying to cause some shit, but...
Message number 2 introduces the idea that Paul and his team have actually spotted an unknown organism that appears to be a very tall man. Keep this in mind as it will come back at the end of this tape. However, he also claims that people have been in the cave before and that their archaeologist co-worker ran away as soon as he found out about the artifacts within the cave. We'll see why this is in a couple tapes. However, it is strange to see that at this moment Paul knew something was wrong, and yet he continued on with his work. Nothing is explicitly said about the condition of his crew thus far, except that they've come down with some sort of sickness.
Weapons, trinkets, and whatever. I'll have him draft up a report for you and send it your way, because I feel like he'd be interested, and he can explain all this shit better than I could anyways. His name's Arnold Rivers. That's about it. Alright, bye.
Message 4. March 26th, 1:03 p.m.
Frank, something ain't right here. Crew's getting worse, more sick. I feel okay so far, but I don't know how long that's gonna last. I saw that thing the guys have been talking about last night, stalking around in the tree line. I swear it had a face. Anyways, just call me back as soon as you can, Frank.
Message 5. March 27th.
Again, I think it's safe to say that Frank actually has not replied to any of Paul's messages. As for the beginning of the tape, we see that it's not even Frank accessing the files. As a callback to the intro where the computer is speaking about someone actually going into the files, his security authorization is overridden, leading us to believe that it's not actually the people involved that are currently viewing these tapes. As Paul's crew becomes more and more sick, he seems to hold on to the idea that Frank will actually assist him, and unfortunately for him, that's just not true.
It's in the woods, and it's watching us, goddammit. It ain't no animal either. Who are you guys gonna put up those fancy hunting cameras and see if we can catch anything? Maybe locals fucking with us? I don't know. We'll figure it out. But yeah, Anyways, I just...
Message 7. Date and time unavailable. Message.
We then find ourselves looking at the woods through the lens of the hunting cams that Paul and his crew have set up. However, we're not initially able to see anything in the woods, which makes it appear like it's actually safe, and perhaps the cameras are just freaking out. However, if you notice the strange gust of wind that almost has sort of depth to it, it appears to be some type of thought form, perhaps in its earliest phase without an actual body yet.
It's Paul. Holy shit, well, a lot of the crew here is sick now, and they're sort of like unresponsive. We tried emergency contacts for them, but they just keep ringing. The phones, they just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. Nobody picked up from any number we tried. Nobody picked up. No answer machines either. We had to call the hospital, and same thing. Just ringing. Just tried 911, still nothing. I figured the phones were fucked up, but...
So this portion of the video here might not seem like it means a whole lot. Maybe no one's actually picking up the phones. However, my theory, and you'll see here in a couple tapes that supports it, perhaps the company that we've come to know and love, Simiodyne USA, is actually intentionally jamming or perhaps stopping these calls from going out because they actually want to see what's going on with Paul and his crew. That's just a theory, and it'll make more sense in a couple videos. However, it's safe to say that no one's picking up. It seems strange that the phones would ring and ring and ring, as if there's no signal or something like that, they tend to go straight to voicemail or an automated answering machine.
I feel like something really bad's gonna happen if I don't go down, so I'm going down tonight.
We find ourselves looking through the lens of yet another hunting camera and seeing what is undoubtedly yet another thought form. Now, it's strange to think that that thought form appeared after Paul claimed he was going down into the mine. Perhaps these thought forms are simply a version of the miners that has been tainted by whatever's down inside the mountain.
This is the end of your messages.
You may be wondering why I didn't say anything through pretty much the duration of that entire clip, and that's because I feel like there's nothing that I can really add to the clip. It shows pretty much the deterioration of a construction crew being affected by some unknown entity. We can only assume that the entity that's affecting all of them has something to do with thought forms and is effectively making them deteriorate at a very rapid pace. When the messages first begin, it seems like it's a very isolated incident for the crew to become sick with whatever they're dealing with. However, as it goes on, we see that more and more of the crew become affected and some even become quote-unquote unresponsive. Now, it's never directly confirmed what's causing the crew to feel like this or even why their food's rotting, but it seems whatever entity is near them simply causes the deterioration of flesh and any living organism, or really any organic organism for that. As he says, it's the middle of March, which is, it's usually a colder month, and their food was well refrigerated. However, when they find it, it seems as if they've left it out in the hot summer for months and it's covered with maggots. At the end of the clip, we're also able to see that Paul himself has become one of these deteriorating entities, a former shell of what he used to be. Now, another cool little detail that I like to point out whenever I do watch this is that if you notice the images of him next to the message box, they actually go from him having a complete smile to very slowly becoming sad. I mean, it doesn't have any real bearing on the story, I just thought it was a cool little Easter egg to mention. However, they mention an entity that they all see as a tall man. And at the end of the clip, we're able to see as it messes with one of the hunting cameras, but it almost seems like it's wearing a mask. Perhaps it's a mask made out of flesh, or it's simply one of the miners that's deteriorated to the point where you can no longer understand what he was or what he is. We then also see what's left of Paul. Originally a smiling man that looked healthy as can be is left nothing but a carcass, staring into the camera. We don't know what caused it or why it happened to Paul, but my personal theory is that these miners here that were corrupted by the unknown entity, perhaps they're the characters breaking into houses all over Massachusetts in the prior tape. I saw this theory again in the comments section of the video and it simply clicked. It just made sense to me, but tell me what you think down in the comments below. Another reason that theory makes so much sense to me is for the simple reason that the jump scare at the end of the previous clip, the hand was wearing some type of worker's glove. Perhaps the exact glove you'd see a miner use while he's working on a cave or attempting to dig a tunnel. The only real evidence we get in this tape about what the entity might be is at the end of message 8. Where Paul talks about how he feels like he has to go into the mine, and that's the only way that he can figure anything out. He can figure what's going on and what's affecting his men. I think it's safe to say that the mine probably is not the best place to go to fix your problems, and I do assume that once he walked down there, his quote-unquote transformation into the figure we see at the end was complete. Assumably, all the miners eventually did go down into that cave and were also turned into similar entities, merely walking carcasses that walk around the streets of Massachusetts. I think it's safe to say that this elusive Frank figure that Paul was attempting to reach out to for a majority of that tape probably knew that something weird was going on in Mount Greylock. However, he sent these people here as essentially guinea pigs to see what would happen to them.
Continue to investigate the recent crime wave that swept across northern Berkshire County, left many of its residents in a state of anxiety and panic. It was 2 weeks ago when the emergency broadcast system was engaged to warn residents to secure their homes due to the activity of a group of individuals who had been targeting and breaking into people's homes. Authorities have since confirmed that the attacks were, in fact, part of an organized criminal effort and have been attributed to a local anti-American militia group operating out of western Massachusetts called... Police have made numerous arrests in connection to militia, and officials continue to release statements to assure the public that they are safe once again.
We've seen a lot of credible information over the past couple of weeks, and the investigation's still ongoing. We're getting closer by the day.
Thankfully, due to the continued efforts of law enforcement, life has been able to return back to normal. Back to normal. Back to normal. To normal. To normal. To normal. Back to normal for residents of Berkshire County.
Tape number 7, also known as Back to Normal, picks up with Dawn Wright, a news anchor speaking about the recent attacks that have occurred in Massachusetts. Law enforcement groups in the area have attributed all of the home break-ins to an anti-American militia group. However, the entity that is actually responsible for these attacks, or perhaps responsible for the deaths of the miners, almost seems angry with this proclamation. He plasters the word liar on the face of the news anchor with what seemingly is a deteriorated version of himself on the camera.
Of Berkshire County.
Tape 8 begins in the midst of the TV hijacking that we saw on Tape 7. It has 3 writers while 2 producers and 1 executive discussing what just happened and who hijacked their network series. One of the producers remarks that they haven't seen Don Wright since his previous segment on the news. Liam Hollander is then tasked to go to his house and find him, as nobody has heard of him since he left the studio.
But by then, the hijacker had already said everything they wanted to say, hadn't they?
Yes, sir.
What a complete fuck up. They made us look like a fucking joke. I'm sure our most popular show. Speaking of which, Don, where the fuck is he? I cannot get hold of him, and he needs to get in here and read a statement to help clean up this fucking mess.
Well, we've been trying to reach him. We've called him multiple times. We've tried his pager. We've asked around to see if anyone's heard from him, but nothing. Right now we've got Gerald standing in for him tonight if Don doesn't show.
You've been to his house?
Well, no. I just thought that maybe he'd be upset if I did that.
Get in your fucking car and go to his fucking house. I don't care if you kick down his front door and drag him here by his ear. You bring him into the studio. Do you understand?
Yes, Mr. Rosenbaum. Of course, I'll do that right now.
There's some real powerful people depending on us right now. They need us to manage the response to these events, to let the public know what's going on, and the last thing we need is it going wider than it already fucking has. So do what you need to do, or I'm going to replace you with some producers who actually know how to produce a fucking show!
The tape makes it fairly obvious that Alan Rosenbaum is in over his head with some type of government entity, and he's been given the task to manage their propaganda and make it seem like the break-ins that had occurred were nothing more than an organized militia group, and not a supernatural entity. The tape then cuts to the archaeologist previously mentioned in the tape Sleeping Dogs. He enters the cave with all of the miners originally, however on his discovery of archaeological artifacts, he decides to exit, and this is his excerpt of the events. The archaeologist claims that he's found different artifacts from times that shouldn't be in one single place. He talks about Mesoamerican and Clovis artifacts, which are 2 very ancient civilizations that have somehow managed to make it to Mount Greylock in Massachusetts. This is strange as there's no other evidence that any of these tribes, or these empires, whatever you'd like to refer to them as, moved anywhere near this side of the world. He goes on to claim that it just doesn't make any sense to him, but I think it's a really cool idea to have all these ancient cultures all culminate in one area that realistically they have, like, no actual reason for being there. It's pretty cool to see that Paul's absolutely freaked out about it as well, because he's an archaeologist, so if anyone's seen it, it would be him. However, he's never seen this before. He then goes on to claim that the government offered him more money, and by the government I mean Frank Porter, that lovely guy that never picked up Paul's phone calls in Sleeping Dogs, offered him a raise to stay on the project and claimed that it would be one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs in the history of humankind. However, the archaeologist did not want to stay on the project regardless, as he says, "You cannot put a price on my life or well-being," which shows that he was very confident something absolutely terrible was going on here, and he left the project. The rest of the tape goes into more detail about what happened to the miners as well as some of the other people involved with the construction company, and it ends with Arnold being hunted down by an unknown figure while he's recording stuff in his closet. However, before we get to that, we're given this 3D animation detailing the creation of our planet as well as other planets in the solar system. claiming that our moon was made up of pieces of an unknown planet that was destroyed in the beginning of human civilization. And by the beginning of human civilization, I mean that's kind of left up to however you want to think about it, but whenever the planets exploded, yeah, it led to another planet. You get the idea. Anyway, that being said, this leads me to believe that Mount Greylock is actually a piece of that unknown planet and has some type of supernatural entity or supernatural aura to it. Do you remember that lovely news anchor we were talking about, and at the end of his video he had the word liar plastered on his face? It kind of looked like he was already dead in the actual video. Yeah, so this is what happens to him here. As we find out, Liam makes it over to Dawn Wright's house to check on him, and when he arrives, he realizes there's been a break-in. The tape that follows is his conversation with the 911 dispatcher and the events that transpired.
Adams Police Department, Dispatcher Carey speaking.
Yes, I'm calling to report a break-in at my coworker's house.
What is your name, sir?
My name is Liam Hollander.
Okay, Liam, you said this was your coworker's house. What is your coworker's address?
It's Parker Hill Road in Adams, number 491.
491 Parker Hill Road, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me, is anybody hurt? Liam, are you still with me?
Yes, sorry.
Is anybody hurt?
Yes.
Then I witnessed many altars constructed out of the mountain stone, along with evidence of mass animal and human sacrifice.
So, yeah, as you can see, the news anchor didn't do very well, and the image of him on the news broadcast that was hijacked was actually foreshadowing for the way that he died. If you realize the way he looked while he was laying in bed was the exact same as the image on the actual broadcast. We then return back to the archaeologist as he continues to discuss the mountain and claims that there's something weird, something people of countless cultures have seen and have come to witness. But we don't know what that is. He recognizes that his time is drawing very, very close to an end, and he kind of has an issue. Whether it's the government coming to tell him, hey bro, you didn't finish your job, so we're gonna kill you, or some other supernatural entity. However, while he's discussing the mountain, he's unable to actually give us a reason as to why he knows there's something down in those mines. He says, and I quote, "I could feel it. It was like a droning in my head." That shows that whatever supernatural entity affected all the miners leading to their eventual deaths was kind of giving everyone a very similar process. Because if we remember in Sleeping Dogs, Paul, the actual construction worker, when he was talking, said that his teeth were humming and he had a drone in his head in, I believe it was tape 8 or voice recording 8. Right before he, didn't make it, he went down to the mines and, he's not getting his 401k. Anyway, we realized that even Arnold Eugene Rivers, also known as the archaeologist, was affected by it. The real question is, can you survive it by simply going far away from the mountain, or are you doomed regardless? Spoiler alert, he did not indeed survive it by going far away from the mountain. The tape then transitions back to the actual computer that's documenting a lot of the events throughout the series. It begins talking about the Morelli Greylock event survivors. Now, I use the word survivor very loosely. As it goes through the list, it shows what survivors were prior to entering the mountain, and then what they came out as, and I'd say, it's not normal. That's a pretty easy way to put it. Pretty much everyone that came out of the mountain is just a walking corpse. They either can't talk at all, or they do talk, and then they have sudden violent tendencies and just murder people. But it goes through a bunch of different survivors, again, quote-unquote survivors, and you can see that pretty much nobody made it out of that cave unscathed.
Outbursts. Standard treatment ineffective. High-dose xylazine is recommended. Only communicate while patient is restrained or via intercom. Now loading. Profile for patient. B6670. Herrera, Ramon. Malformations. Notes. Uncommunicative. Patient appears to be in catatonic state. Warning, patient may sit up very suddenly, without provocation, to project or vomit at any staff in area. Patient's vomit is extremely corrosive and emits nerve gas. All treatments ineffective. Studies must be conducted with full anti-corrosive gear and air purifying respirator equipped on all staff involved. Now loading. Profile for patient. B8816. Fleming, Charles. Malformations. Notes. Uncommunicative. Warning, patient will attack on sight. Do not interact. Immunity to pain. Patient exhibits cannibalistic tendencies. All treatments ineffective. Immediate euthanasia recommended. Now loading. Profile for patient. B4041. Oakhurst, Scott. Malformations. Notes. Communicative. Communicate with caution. Warning, patient actively pretends to be benevolent and friendly. Strong homicidal and cannibalistic tendencies. Killed and partially consumed 6 staff members on April 6, 87. Patient laughed hysterically during the attack. All treatments ineffective. Immediate euthanasia or permanent restraint for further study recommended. Now loading. Profile for patient. B7992. Kowalski, Edward. Malformations. Notes. Communicative. Hazardous. Warning, patient possesses inhuman power of suggestion and influence over others. Do not interact. All treatments ineffective. Immediate euthanasia recommended. Now loading. Profile for patient. B1584. Rafferty, John. Malformations. Notes. Uncommunicative. Hazardous. Patient appears to be deceased. No vital signs. Patient's body not decomposing. Warning, staff have become ill after even brief time spent in patient's room. Illness disregards protective suiting. Immediate quarantine required for all victims. Mortality rate post-exposure currently 92%. Survivors subject to rapid physical and mental malformations. All treatments ineffective. Immediate remote euthanasia recommended.
I consider...
So yeah, as you can see, none of the survivors really survived per se. They all came out with absolutely horrible malformations and were just absolutely destroyed physically. That being said, I don't know if you guys noticed, but the faces that actually flash through of the crew after their infection, or whatever you want to call it, are similar to the faces that are actually shown throughout the series during quite a few of the jump scares and at the end of the earlier clips. Again, this just supports my idea that those attacks that happened prior were simply the minors after this unknown phenomena. We then cut back to Arnold as he continues to talk about how he just literally has no idea what happened to him at all. He found a local investigator and paid him essentially to figure out who's been following him, who's been watching him, literally all of these different things, but he simply just is not able to find those answers. He's talking about how he thinks the government might send someone to kill him and that he's paranoid over this, but as we'll see in a moment, the government doesn't necessarily send a man to kill him.
They're here. I'm inside my bedroom closet. I'm going to keep the tape recorder running, and I'm hiding in here with my files. If something happens to me, and you find any tapes or files somehow, please bring it to the investigator, Jim Malcolm of North Adams. That goes for this video footage as well.
Come on out, it's the police.
Yeah, so it's safe to say someone came to kill him, but I don't know if necessarily the government sent that entity to kill him. I mean, there is the chance that perhaps they learned how to control it, or Cinedyne USA learned how to control it and sent it to kill him, but I think the more likely outcome or conclusion is that simply by being near the mountain, it was almost as if the entity, had to hunt him. As we see, it pretty much killed everyone else that was near the mountain or turned them into one of those lovely zombie-esque things. Anyway, that being said, one thing you'll notice about the entity is it says a plethora of different phrases, including it's the police, and then at the end it has a little girl saying, oh, it's a monster. This leads me to believe that perhaps the entity is able to mimic the last words of its victims, because, they all kind of make sense for what could be the last words of someone, I guess, right? Anyway, that being said, yeah, he didn't make it. Bro did not make it. The archaeology degree, not worth it. He's dead. And, yeah. Anyway, next tape. Tape 9, also known as Trojan Technology, begins with an announcement by American President Lyndon B. Johnson as he announces his NAI. You may be wondering what the NAI is. It's the National Access Initiative. It's being done in tandem with Cinedyne USA, which is the company we've heard only good things about thus far in this series. And essentially the idea behind the initiative is that all Americans need basic electronics in their home. So it's things like television, cell phones, burglar alarms, fire alarms, pretty much anything you see in a home now that you'd be like, oh, why didn't they have that back then? The idea is that Americans will have access to that regardless of their income, their location, pretty much anything else that, usually would dictate if you could afford things like that. The tape then shows us a distorted newspaper of John F. Kennedy, but only after accidentally giving us a little bit of a glimpse into a phone call between some tech executives and political figures, talking about how John F. Kennedy doesn't support the program. I think the implication here is that they did have him assassinated because of his lack of support for this program, and they believed that what they were doing was bigger than, well, a president, apparently. Obviously, that's never confirmed, but like I said, that's the massive implication by showing the newspaper of his death right after the phone call. The tape then proceeds to cut to a speech by Percival C. Rothwell, who's actually the president of this lovely company we've only heard good things about throughout the entirety of this series. He's essentially speaking about how he believes that Cinedyne USA needs to essentially connect every single American to each other, and there's no other ulterior motive, because as you know, when people give stuff out for free, it's only because they're good people and nothing else. However, as we learn about 3 seconds later, that's not the case, as each piece of technology that they do give out is actually filled with spyware, or simply hidden cameras that are able to monitor American families so they can gain information on, well, whatever they're trying to figure out. At this point in the series, it's kind of left up to interpretation or really just assumptions as to what Cinedyne USA actually wants to do with these programs, but if we want to think about their lovely breakthroughs, as Wendigoon put it, they've simply made the thought form manifester, they've killed a bunch of miners in, well, a mine, and now they're spying on the American public. An absolutely lovely company that literally just wants to help out, obviously, because that's what they do. The tape then begins to become a little bit distorted, and we hear as the president of Cinedyne USA has a conversation with an unknown individual. Perhaps it's someone else at his company, or it's a political figure with the reach to actually oversee the assassination of JFK. It's never completely confirmed, but we do assume that what they're talking about here is the assassination of JFK, as they discuss how he won't support their program initiative at all. Oh, because, he's actually a decent person and doesn't want to spy on people. But Semiodyne USA, being the lovely group of wholesome people they are, decide that the only way to deal with any opposition is to have them murdered. After that lovely glitch that gives us a glimpse into an even more lovely corporation, we're greeted with a message in front of one of the Semiodyne USA cameras. This is actually a good thing, as it shows that people start to understand, hey man, they're not actually good people, and they're not giving us electronics because they like us. They want to watch us, and so now they started covering it with lovely messages with no vulgar language at all. Through one of Semiodyne USA's cameras, we're then greeted by what I can only assume is a thought form, or, well, I guess what they'd assume is a ghost. We see in the background that the closet door's opening, and I can't tell if it's maybe because it's like a little girl playing with her imaginary friend and it just happened to capture it, or if the thought form itself has decided to open the closet because, I don't know, it wants to open the closet. But my assumption is that, like I said, there is a little girl somewhere just kind of thinking up this lovely thought form that's chilling in her room, and they just happen to catch that. The date on that video was 1993, which is quite a big time jump. We then see a group of people in sacrificial masks that seem to be a lovely group of, cultists. Honestly, I'm not really sure what they have to do with the plot at the moment, but their masks look very similar to the entity we saw murder the archaeologist in the previous tape, and since I don't have any thought processes in my head and I have two brain cells fighting to keep me speaking, I'm just going to assume that they're one of the entities. The next part of this tape has us looking through the lens of yet another Semiodyne USA camera in the room of a little girl by the name of Katie. Katie simply has this absolutely terrifying, I don't even know what type of creature it is, just sitting in the corner of her room. She's a little bit confused, like most people would be, and I just want to say Katie's a unit, because as soon as this thing popped up in my room, I probably would cry and scream and then shit myself. Anyway, that being said, the creature in the corner of her room identifies itself as her imaginary friend. Katie doesn't really think she thought up any imaginary friend and seems pretty confused by it. She then says perhaps it was in the, and I quote, doctor office place, and that kind of leads me to assume that perhaps Semiodyne USA was doing some type of testing on Katie, or, well, children involved in these videos in general. But anyways, the lovely entity in her room decides to urge her to come closer. She pretty much says she can't see it because, she doesn't have her glasses on and her eyes are bad. It decides to just keep telling her to come closer, and for some reason she listens. I understand it's a little girl, but Jesus Christ, if I saw this thing in my room, like I said, I'd cry, I'd scream, and I would nosedive out my window, whatever, to get away from this absolutely terrifying entity. She eventually gets very, very, very close to the entity, and we see as her hand reaches across the camera lens. And then the entity, being the absolute monster it is, jumps across the camera, assumably killing Katie. This is just one more instance of what we assume are thought forms essentially killing people and showing up in front of these cameras, and it leads me to assume that Semiodyne USA didn't put these cameras in absolutely all of their technology, and it's more likely they put it in the technology of certain individuals maybe they tested on, or perhaps were involved with Mount Greylock. It's kind of hard to say, but that's kind of the assumption that I'm personally drawing right now, and I hope the series explores it a little more. Well, actually, I'm sure the series will explore it a little more and give us a genuine answer to that question.
The Johnson administration went on to say that their current projections for a nationwide release are for some time between mid-1966 and early 1967.
So in the distortion that we see in the video after Katie is killed by that monster in her bedroom, we see this image here. Now, it's kind of hard to tell what it is, but it appears to be someone either strapped into a chair or just sitting in a chair with something attached to their head. Originally, I was like, okay, that's just hair standing up. Maybe it has something to do with electricity, until I went back to tape 3, where it's talking about the orientation for the thought form manifester, and it kind of clicked that this might just be an image of that. Assuming that when Katie was talking about the doctor office place, she was talking about somewhere Cineodyne USA was actually testing on her with the Thoughtform Manifester, it would make sense as to why she was visited by this creature. Maybe it was something she thought of at that, containment area, and simply it followed her home. We've seen in kind of other clips that these entities do tend to follow people home and really overall the globe once they've been seen or once they've been dealt with. Kind of like the tall man in the mask that killed the miners, he followed the archaeologist pretty much, across the country and hunted him down. And I don't think it's that far-fetched to think that all thought forms operate in this way, and whatever we saw in her room was simply the thought form she saw while she was hooked up to the thought form manifester. I haven't really found anything to confirm that, but like I said, that's just my theory on that image. This tape then ends as we glimpse over an answering machine of the Tiffany Crisaldi. If that name doesn't sound familiar to you, that's okay, but Tiffany Crisaldi was actually the individual from one of the previous tapes that lost her baby. We assumed during that tape that, the baby was a thought form and that she actually didn't have a pregnancy at all, but this does show that there's more to her story in the grand universe of Greylock than just that one video. And with that, we have the end of the tape. So guys, that's actually going to do it for the overview of Greylock as of this moment. There are 3 more tapes out as of the 11th of October, but I'm going to actually save those 3 tapes for their own video, as in length, they are just super long. They're very, very long. I believe tape 10's 20 minutes and tape 12's like 33, 34 minutes, something along those lines. So I'm going to have an entire video actually just dedicated to those 3 tapes. But we are going to get into a little bit of the comparison and a little bit of the contrasting of this series, Greylock, and then we're going to be talking about UrbanSpook's The Painter. If you guys did enjoy the video up to this point, I just want to remind you, because I'm a YouTuber and yeah, this is what I do apparently. If you want to support the channel, please feel free to go down below, drop a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and you'll be notified when I actually upload the second part of this series. And if you guys have anything that you think I could have improved on during the duration of this video, let me know that down below as well. With that being said, we're now going to shift gears and head into the second part of the video. So, the most important part of really any series, any horror series, any movie, any video, anything you've ever seen in your entire life that, someone actually wants you to watch is the introduction. I think the introduction of both of these series are actually quite good. But funny enough, I'm gonna have to say that I think The Painter has a better introduction. I think the first video of The Painter was pretty much the best video in the entire series for me, because that's where it gives you a lot of open-ended questions that you kind of want to answer yourself, and it really does set up The Painter as this absolutely terrifying serial killer that finds a lot of joy in murdering people and then documenting it in his photos. But that by no means is me saying that Greylock has a bad introduction video. I think the introduction video for Greylock is simply just different. I think it works where it kind of gives you the imagery that the rest of the series is going to play off of, and it kind of gives you a little bit of narrative in the AI voice in the background that's talking about the credentials and the computer being overridden. And I think that it's effective for what it's trying to do, but I do wish that they would have given us just a little bit more information-wise on the very first video. I mean, as you watch it, obviously you do kind of figure out more what's going on, but for it being an introduction video, I can't say that it would make me necessarily want to watch the rest of them if I had to base my entire perception off the 1 minute and 30-second clip. Whereas with The Painter, when I see those faces and it starts talking about a serial killer, it's really setting up a super interesting premise that I honestly do like to explore, or I'd want to explore in the future. Now, this is kind of talking out of the view of someone that's never seen either of the series, and I've made it pretty obviously known that I prefer Greylock as a series over The Painter, but this is just me kind of highlighting different parts of each, because The Painter isn't bad by any means. I don't think the series itself is terrible, and I think some parts of it do absolutely shine through. One such part being the previously mentioned introduction. I think Faces, which is the first video, is just absolutely incredible, and it really does reel in your attention. That's pretty much all I have to say for the intro videos, as thankfully they're pretty short, so I don't have to make a huge section on them, but let me know what you guys think down below. Do you think The Painter has a better introduction video, or do you think Greylock has a better introduction video? This might actually come as a surprise to quite a lot of people, but I actually prefer the tempo and series progression of The Painter slightly more than I do Greylock. Again, that's not saying that Greylock necessarily has terrible progression or tempo. I think it's very well done. I just personally more enjoy the slow burn that, The Painter gives you. It's kind of like information that it slowly gives to you, and for quite a few episodes it works pretty well. Again, this is not including necessarily the content, more just how the content flows, and if we were just to look at that without actually involving the intricacies of the series, I would say that I actually do enjoy The Painter slightly more with the tempo and progression. But the way that Greylock works it is also kind of entertaining. It's just, Greylock is not a chronological story, which I'm not a massive fan of. That's just a personal thing. That's nothing against the creator. It doesn't take away from the work at all. I just personally enjoy it more when it's like, these are the series of events, this is the time frame in which it happened, this is what happened, where it happened, right? And I think that that's a pretty cool premise, and I think The Painter does that a little bit better. I don't know if he's doing it completely on purpose, but I think that the way he lays out the events and it remains a chronological order through the entire series is pretty cool. And Greylock is a little bit different, and it's kind of hard to gauge the tempo overall, as I don't believe the series is actually completely finished, but as of this moment, it's kind of started to jump everywhere, and it makes it really hard to track what's going on. Whereas with The Painter, it's very, very easy to track what's going on. And again, like I said, that takes nothing away from the narrative of either. It's just I personally am more of a look at something and I like to enjoy it and understand what's going on, there at the moment. Whereas with Greylock, I really had to rewatch clips, and I had to look at other people break it down, and I had to, figure out how everything connected chronologically, and it's definitely fun for some people, but when I go to an analog horror series, I'm really just hoping for that dumbed down version of just like, stare at it, this is what happens, right? And again, maybe that's just because I'm an idiot. But it's really up to whoever's watching it, and that's just how I feel about the two and how they progress throughout the series. Again, this is not including the content. This isn't me saying the content flows super well. It's me saying the actual time progression and how the events are portrayed in order. That's what's actually well done. And again, this isn't me saying one is better than the other. It's not me saying Greylock sucks, UrbanSpook did absolutely incredible. It's me just saying that they have differences, and I personally enjoy the dumbed down version of it, but that's just me. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Okay, so now in what's going to sound like a direct contradiction to what I said about 10 seconds ago, we're going to be talking about the narrative depth of each of them. Remember, the last part that I was talking about was the tempo and how things flowed chronologically, stuff like that, and what's easier for me personally to understand, because that's just how human brains are, right? When we're told things in order, it's going to make more sense than if we have to piece it together ourselves. But now we're going to be talking a little bit about narrative depth. So I think it's pretty easy to see where I'm going to go with this one. I think that Greylock's narrative depth is just significantly better than The Painter. Because for the exact reason that I enjoy The Painter, watching it, I don't enjoy learning about it or, understanding it, I suppose you could say. Because when you break it down to its bare bones, The Painter is literally just, this man killed this person and then did this thing and then left a painting behind. You can apply that formula to literally every episode and it will pretty much be that episode, right? There's one exception to that I can think of off the top of my head, and that's the, 911 call. The girl gives the wrong address, that jazz, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but that being said, I think the narrative depth in The Painter just isn't there. And that's not me saying like, oh man, UrbanSpook, stop writing. That's not you know, it's not. That's not what that is. All I'm trying to say is that the story is very, very easy to understand, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good thing. It's easy to understand because there's very little to, like, actually understand. It's literally just a murderer, and then the biggest plot twist is, oh wait, there's two murderers that are murdering people, and they're leaving paintings, right? That's the biggest plot twist. But then you take a look at Greylock, and it's so intricate. It is just absolutely crazy. Because while you're watching the tapes, like I said in the previous point, the tapes are not in chronological order, and there's a lot of references throughout that you have to have outside knowledge to know about, right? There's a religious undertone to some of the episodes, and you have to understand what part of the Bible or what it's referencing in the Bible to really get a good grip of what you're watching. And I think that that's very cool, but again, you know, in reference to my last point, it's cool, but it's not easy to understand. And that's not me saying it's a bad or good thing. I'm just saying it's less easy to understand because it's out of order, right? You understand what I'm saying? I can't wait to go down in the comments and have people be like, "You're contradicting yourself immediately. What do you mean?" But all I'm trying to say is that the narrative depth of Greylock and the story itself, it has a lot of moving parts that do make it cool, but also make it very difficult to understand for the basic viewer. For example, you start watching Greylock and you're just like, okay, so it's going to be a horror series about some type of thought form, you know, a demon, an entity, blah, 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 right? But then as you go through it, you realize, oh, it's a lot bigger than that. We've got government conspiracy theories. We've got literally like devil thingies. We've got people deteriorating, becoming zombies because of this little cave. You know, there's all these cool little moving parts, and then when you piece it together, like the whole thing with the miners, right, that they all turned into zombies, and then, like, I assumed they attacked the buildings prior to that, which actually, when you look at it in order of the tapes, is after it. You see what I mean? It gets a little bit difficult, but I also think it's done in a way where it does make you keep watching, because the answers to the questions you're asking now are given 3 tapes later, and I think that that's really cool, and the narrative of it is very well done. It's super well done, but again, it makes it less easy to understand. That's really all I'm trying to say, but I think Greylock absolutely takes the cake in this category, and it's not even close. The narrative depth of that thing, keep in mind, Greylock's not done yet. It's still going. It's crazy. There's so many plot twists, there's so many theories, and I think it's really well done that in Greylock, none of those theories are really confirmed, so people can believe what they want to believe, and then you can look at things and be like, well, I see this, so I have this theory, and someone can look at the exact same thing and have a different theory, and that's what makes it so cool. It's almost as if the series is like a living, breathing video, right? It's a living, breathing thread with all the viewers that are watching it, because a lot of us see well, all of us see the exact same videos, but then we'll draw different conclusions. And I think that that is so cool, and it gives way to an awesome community, and that's the difference, you know, between the two. Again, just to summarize this point, the painter is easy to understand, but there's not a lot of narrative depth there because you're given a super linear story. Whereas Greylock, the story is not nearly as linear, and it's branching off constantly, but that also adds an entire new amount of depth to the overall story. You know, at the end of the day, both of these creators went out there and they did something that I personally can't do. I can't make an analog horror series, and I think they both did really, really well. They're both super unique series with their own little aspects that make them just that, unique. And they add something to the analog horror genre that nothing else has. UrbanSpook isn't, you know, the best writer by any means, and his series isn't perfect, but I do think that he can grow as a writer, and his series can go in a direction that improves it dramatically. I would absolutely love to see The Painter become like a staple of analog horror as a comeback, and just be one of the most beloved series. You know, it's possible, and I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know what's going through UrbanSpook's head. That series isn't finished yet either, so it can change, and you know, it may very well come out to be an incredible series. I think Greylock has an incredible basis, the story's really well done, and I think it's a pretty solid series overall. But me saying I like Greylock doesn't mean I hate UrbanSpook. I think his series is good as well. You know, it's all about perspective and how you look at it. And I think that they can both go out there and make truly exceptional series. But again, they did more than I did. They went out there and at least made them. And for that, I think we as a community just need to understand that not everything is going to be perfect. There will be little kinks you have to work out when you're writing a story. UrbanSpook is an incredibly new writer and a new content creator, and I hope to see him really improve. Greylock, I also hope to see, the end really come together in a way that does justice for the rest of the story. I'm not quite sure the time frame that Rob Gavagan is going to end it in, or if we're even anywhere near the end of the Greylock story. All I know is it's not finished. But I'm keeping my eyes peeled for both of these series, and I really hope to see them both just go a positive direction from here. That's really all I have to say on the matter. I appreciate you guys watching this video and spending almost an hour and 40 minutes with me here today. I understand that this review here at the end wasn't necessarily comprehensive and it wasn't super analytical, but it was my thoughts on these two series and why I think that they're both positives in their own way, and they both have negatives that don't necessarily destroy the integrity of the story. If you guys enjoyed this video, I really hope to see you back here either next week or whenever I get part 2 up. But thank you so much for watching. It's been Payne. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and before I leave, I just want to say please don't send any hate towards either of these content creators. I don't know why you would, but for some reason if you wanted to be malicious to either of them, please don't. They're absolutely incredible content creators, and I enjoy both of their works in their own ways. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one.